Let's dive into one of the great what-ifs of modern history. We're going to go back to a moment when the entire future of Europe was hanging in the balance and ask a really simple question. What if the massive democratic revolutions of the 19th century had actually, won?
So picture this. The year is 1848. A tidal wave of change is building, and it's about to crash over this old order of kings and emperors and aristocrats who've been running the show for centuries.
From Paris to Prague, from Berlin to Budapest, Europe is literally on fire. And this isn't just one little rebellion. We're talking about a continent-wide contagion of hope and absolute fury.
You've got students, factory workers, liberals demanding constitutions, nationalists demanding their own countries. They're all rising up together. They're toppling thrones, they're storming palaces, and they're absolutely convinced that a new world is right around the corner.
Yeah, but we all know how this story really ends. In our timeline, the old guard regrouped, the armies marched in, and that beautiful dream was just crushed. The revolutions of 1848 failed.
But what if they hadn't? What if that revolutionary fire wasn't put out? What if it actually succeeded and forged a completely new kind of continent? Well, that's the rabbit hole we're going down today.
Okay, so for this alternate history to work, our timeline has to fork at three super critical moments. You could say these are the hinges upon which the door to a new world swings open.
So first up, in France, the Second Republic doesn't elect another Napoleon. Nope. Instead, a powerful socialist and Republican coalition actually holds on to power. Second, that Frankfurt Parliament, it doesn't fall apart. Germany actually unifies, but from the bottom up, as a republic. And finally, the massive, creaking Habsburg Empire, it doesn't crush its rebels. It cracks under the pressure and shatters into a bunch of new revolutionary states.
And with those three dominoes falling, the entire map of Europe is torn up and redrawn. The revolutionaries, they don't just want their own little republics, they want something bigger, a new kind of union built on the ideals they all share.
And get this, it happens fast. Just 2 years after those first sparks, in 1850, the United Communist States of Europe is officially declared. A red continent is born, almost 70 years before the Russian Revolution in our timeline. Just think about that. So what was the big idea here? What really held all these revolutionaries together? Well, this wasn't just about politics. It was a vision for a whole new society. They wanted to protect workers, take land from the old aristocracy and give it to the people, let oppressed nations have their own countries, and get rid of the royals for good. And the whole thing would be governed by a brand new Continental Congress.
Okay, now this is super important. When we say communism here, you got to throw out everything you know from the 20th century. This is 1848 style. The Communist Manifesto had literally just been published. This ideology is this raw, potent mix of early socialist ideas. We're talking decentralized worker councils, local citizen assemblies. Think radical democracy and economic cooperation, not the top-down single-party state that Lenin would build much, much later. It's a whole different animal.
So, as you can probably imagine, a giant, revolutionary superstate popping up in the heart of Europe, well, it doesn't exactly go unnoticed. In fact, the rest of the world basically panics. Great Britain, terrified this revolutionary fever could jump the channel, kind of hunkers down into this very fearful neutrality. Tsarist Russia, now pretty much the last old-school monarchy standing, becomes the UCSC's #1 enemy. And the United States, after some initial curiosity, it turns hostile, absolutely terrified that this new workers' first model could inspire its own growing labor movements.
This new system completely flips the script on how progress happens. See, in our timeline, the Industrial Revolution was fueled by this cutthroat competition between nations and by private money. But in this timeline, it's driven by huge, continent-wide public works projects and cooperative factories. It's just a perfect example of how a different ideology creates a totally different kind of modern world.
And this isn't just a European thing. The shockwaves ripple out across the entire globe. The UCSC's whole stance against dynasties and for self-determination, it makes colonialism pretty much impossible to justify. France starts pulling out of Algeria by the 1860s, and Germany, they never even get into the colonialism game. The age of empire starts to crumble decades and decades ahead of schedule.
So, how does all of this completely rewrite the next 100 years? Well, with all those old rivalries gone, the massive, world-shattering conflicts that defined our 20th century are just erased, wiped from the board.
Think about our history, right? World War I, kicked off by that Franco-German rivalry and the mess in the Balkans. World War II, driven by the absolute horror of fascism. And of course the Cold War,
a decades-long nuclear standoff.
Now, in this alternate timeline, a completely different story. The world is defined by a Cold War, sure, but it starts way back in the 1850s. It pits the revolutionary UCSC against the old guard powers led by Russia. You still get proxy wars for sure, but not the global slaughter we saw. And, this is key, there is no fascism.
And this might be the most profound consequence of all. Fascism rose from the ashes of World War I. It fed on economic collapse, on national humiliation, on the fear of communism. But in a world where a socialist system provides stability and has been normal for decades, fascism just never finds fertile ground to grow. And that means no Mussolini, no Hitler, no Holocaust, and no World War II.
And what about the man himself, Karl Marx? Well, his story gets this really fascinating, kind of ironic twist. Instead of being this exiled revolutionary whose ideas get picked up and used later, he becomes a prominent government critic inside the UCSC. He's this respected voice who's constantly yelling at the government for not being radical enough, for compromising too much. He becomes an internal dissident, not some revolutionary icon.
So, let's fast forward. What does this world actually look like by the time we get to our modern era? Well, the legacy is a world that has been completely and utterly remade. This table really lays it all out, side by side. Instead of a European Union made of separate countries, you have a fully integrated socialist superstate. The word communism isn't this loaded term tied to Stalin. It's just a normal political system that's been around for 150 years. Global inequality is way lower, and the 20th century saw non-nuclear continental wars, not two devastating world wars.
All right, so let's boil it all down. What are the big takeaways? This alternate world is way less genocidal. There's no Hitler, there's no Stalin. It's less imperialist. But it's also been locked in this intense ideological Cold War for a much, much longer time. And yet, weirdly enough, its technology might have progressed even faster, thanks to all that continental cooperation.
Which leaves us with this one final, really tough question. A world that avoided the Holocaust, that dodged the nightmare of the World Wars, but was shaped by a century and a half of its own bitter conflicts. Is that a better world? Or is it simply a different one?